Hello, everybody, and welcome to today's show. I'm your host, Zach Drew. Before we dive in today, I need to prepare you for what you're about to see and hear. So we're going to start this show a little different. I'm going to roll a clip that if you had heard it 15 years ago, you probably would have laughed out loud. You would have said, that guy's nuts. He's over the top. He's lost it. And honestly, that was the common reaction. This was the kind of thing that sounded so outrageous, so bizarre, that people dismissed it without a second thought. The man saying it, Alex Jones. And if you know Alex, you know his style. He's loud, he's intense, he's hardcore, sometimes abrasive, sometimes, offensive. He delivers his words like a sledgehammer. And a lot of the times, because of that style, people completely tune him out. But here's why I'm starting here. What he was shouting about in 2010 and what he said he first heard all the way back in 1989 is finally breaking into mainstream here in 2025. The very things that were once ridiculed as conspiracy theories are now written about, investigated, and confirmed by the same establishment that used to mock them, right? That's where we are today. So here's my tactic for today's program. We're going to begin with something that sounds absurd, something that feels like it can't possibly be true. You'll hear it and think, that's wild, there's no way. And then for the rest of the program, I'm going to walk you step by step through the evidence, through the reports, the headlines, and the statements from respected institutions, showing you that what sounded crazy at the time has, well, in fact, become our reality. So with that in mind, let's roll the clip.
In just a few minutes, you can go use any major search engine and search the terms hospital caught stealing organs, or hospital caught stealing liver or kidneys, or hospital caught stealing corneas. Where I live, Austin, Texas, they've been caught repeatedly at city-run hospitals stealing people's corneas. They do not ask. They do not care if you are an organ donor or not. They're already stealing them. And I've told the story about I was 15 taking driver's safety in Dallas, Texas, and my dad, who's a dentist and also done oral surgery in hospitals, he said, son, don't sign the organ donor card. And I said, why? And he said, the word is from surgeons and physicians I know in Dallas and in other parts of the country, if you come in and aren't even brain dead and have a good chance of being revived, they will not give you as much care in some hospitals because they get kickbacks. They can get hundreds of thousands of dollars for your organs. And that was 20 years ago, 20 plus years ago. And I didn't believe him. When you're 15 years old, you tend to not buy everything your parents are telling you. You think you know everything. And then years later, I saw 60 Minutes report on it, where hospitals in Chicago and other areas were killing people. Austin's been caught doing it and taking people's retinas and killing people that could have been saved, and taking blood for 40 years worldwide of all babies. It's now 40 years next month. 40 years, a global UN program. They tell you it's a blood test for your baby. Now they admit it goes into this global database. It shows how it's this. Rick Perry comes out and says, it's the law, you must take Gardasil. And the whole media goes along with the lie saying, it's the law, it's the law. Their lies are getting bigger and bigger and bigger. And more, I think they're just exposing all the pedophilia to where we just hear it every day and get accustomed to it.
All right, let's take a breather, let's pause, right? I know that sounded insane. The tone, right, the delivery. But listen to the words. Not the sledgehammer. Because all across America right now, the organ donation system is under fire. And it started about 8 weeks ago, whenever it started surfacing to the news, and there's been, a great deal of developments even since then. Congress admits there have been horrifying near misses, patients showing signs of life while organs were already being prepped. Families are, well, they're losing trust, and many are pulling their names from the registry altogether. At the same time, we've got elites writing, op-eds in New York Times saying we need to declare more people dead so we can harvest more organs. I kid you not. We're going to read it on today's program. And whistleblowers, even RFK Jr. himself, are exposing hospitals for procuring organs from patients who weren't gone yet. You just heard the claim from Alex Jones. Now let's just do a rapid fire, all right, on articles to look at the receipts. All right, here we go. First one on the list. This is a .gov website, U.S. Department of Health and Human Services. HHS finds systemic disregard for sanctity of life in organ transplant system. Here's the next one from Glenn Beck's The Blaze. Donor may still be alive. How organ donation groups allegedly exploit grieving families to cash in on billions. Here's one from InfoWars. We're going to dive into this in statements from RFK. RFK exposes hospitals procuring organs from patients despite showing signs of life. Writing for the Daily Wire, Matt Walsh, the dark truth about becoming an organ donor. Reuters, one of the most respected news outlets in the world. U.S. begins organ transplant reform as signs of life found before some retrievals. Newsweek, because of all of this, which would have sounded insane 10, 15 years ago, there has now been, according to Newsweek, mass exodus from organ donor registries following media coverage. And what has been the response to reform in this industry? Making sure that we double and triple check the standards of what it means to be dead. Well, that means there's a heck of a lot of money on the line for some people. So, Reuters, organ donation groups sue to block new U.S. certification system. All right, this is not a conspiracy forum. These are headlines. These are policy memos. These are investigations. And this isn't just about medicine. This is ultimately it's about man. It's about the love of money being the root of all evil. And it's about man playing God with life and death. And I believe it connects directly to what the Bible warned us about in these last days. Now that was a 5.5-minute intro. We're going to break it all down from the headlines to this, the spiritual agendas, to the spiritual reality behind it right after this. For those of you that watch the show, you know that we are currently in the largest fundraiser in IGBY, the Zach Drew Show's history. I'm really excited about it. I want to take about 1.5 to 2 minutes of your time and give you an update. If you haven't tuned in the last few weeks, we're doing this fundraiser. We started it in August, all right? And it's going to go through the year. And we are trying to raise $120,000. We really feel like God is, wanting us to do more, speak more. But like the world operates, it takes a lot of financial backing to do that. We want to do multiple shows a week. We want to do this show. We also want to do a show exclusively on biblical teachings, even in an expository way, book by book, verse by verse, and even a podcast forum in the middle of the week for the younger generation. We want to do powerful short clips throughout the week. We want to bring Andrew Bellers on full time. And to do all of that, $120,000 will cover all of the new shows we're doing, all of the SEO work, all of the web stuff, things, it costs a lot of money to do TV. And to bring Andrew Bellers on full time, the $120,000 on top of what we regularly, receive every month, that is going to cover the first 2 years, because we do believe that what we're planning on doing will take some time. If God's favor is just radically there right off the bat, it could be 6 months. I don't think it's going to be enough time. 1 year is pushing. I believe that if we had 2 years of finances lined up, we could pull the trigger on all of this right then. And I want to thank everybody who's donated in the last few days. I want to thank Julie. I want to thank Dan and Marianne again, who gave. So they're so awesome. Barbara, thank you for giving again. David and Carol, thank you. Richard, thank you. David, another David, thank you. Dennis and Jana, thank you. Carol, thank you. And then Carol and Kenneth, thank you for getting involved. I'm just excited. I'm blessed every time I see it come through. Like, hey, people believe in us. Like, we can do this. We've raised just shy of $21,000 since we began in August. And remember that because of Stan and Mark, two partners of the ministry, we currently have a $25,000 match taking place right now. Since we have announced that, just around $3,000 has been matched. So the next $22,020 that comes in will be matched dollar for dollar. Just go to ZachDrewShow.com and click that bright orange donate button and send us an email to let us know that your donation through the website is for the fundraiser. Or in the memo section on a check, you can write us at Zach Drew Show, P.O. Box 797, Decatur, Illinois, 62525. Get involved. If you believe in strong Christian conservative voices, you believe in Jesus Christ as your Lord and Savior, then get behind like-minded people with good soil. So visit us, ZachDrewShow.com, write us, Zach Drew Show, P.O. Box 797, Decatur, Illinois, 62525. Let's get back to the show. Well, you know something is happening whenever the mainstream news is now confirming what other people would have called conspiracy theories, even though it's always been a slow walk in the right direction if they ever even get there. But here's one article from the AP, from the Associated Press. U.S. organ donation system faces scrutiny and changes after reports of disturbing near misses. Let's get into it. The U.S. is developing new safeguards, so we have not developed them. Who knows when it's going to be developed? All right, we need to stop right there and just establish that. The U.S. is developing new safeguards for the organ transplant system after a government investigation found a Kentucky group continued preparations for organ donation by some patients who showed signs of life. While the organ removals were canceled, near misses that some lawmakers called horrifying should never happen. So that's the garbage. So it broke about what's actually happening, that people are legitimately being killed all throughout America because it is a cash cow, or organ transplants is a very lucrative business. And so they cannot deny the facts. So now they're spinning it as all of these near misses, all right? Near misses that some lawmakers called horrifying should never happen. A House subcommittee asked how to repair trust in the transplant network for potential organ donors and families. The hearing came after a federal investigation began last fall on allegations that a Kentucky donation group pressured a hospital in 2021 to proceed with plans to withdraw life support and retrieve organs from a man despite signs that he might be waking up from his drug overdose. So, here's the thing. Even the mainstream media admits it. Near misses where patients showed signs of life while organs were being prepped. When culture devalues life across the board in the womb, it inevitably devalues life at the deathbed. They say, don't worry, new safeguards are coming, but how do you safeguard a system that's rotten at its core? Now, I also, we all have our driver's license, or you have either you're an organ, you donate your organs or you don't, right? And I need to make this clear. Because on paper, it's one of the most virtuous things you can do, right? The most sacrificial, whenever I'm gone, I don't need them, give them away. So I want to be clear, I'm not saying that you can't personally choose to be an organ donor, right? If that's something you believe in, that's between you and God. But here's the thing, if you are for it, then maybe it would be wise to wait until reform is more than just political promises, okay? And maybe you don't agree with me now, and you might by the end of the program. Maybe wait until safeguards are real, not theoretical. You're entrusting your life to a system that's already proven it cannot be trusted. Here's the next article. RFK exposes hospitals procuring organs from patients despite showing signs of life. Let's go ahead and put on the screen the first X post from the HHS. It says, under Secretary Kennedy's leadership, HHS is restoring integrity and transparency to organ procurement and transplant policy by putting patients' lives first. What a novel idea. These reforms are essential to restoring trust, ensuring informed consent, and protecting the rights and dignity of prospective donors and their families. Now, RFK Jr. responded to the post by saying this: "Our findings show that hospitals allowed the organ procurement process to begin when patients showed signs of life, and this is horrifying. The organ procurement organizations that coordinate access to transplants will be held accountable. The entire system must be fixed to ensure that every potential donor's life is treated with the sanctity it deserves." Now let's go ahead and go back to the article for this last statement. "These findings from the HHS confirm what the Trump administration has long warned. Entrenched bureaucracies, outdated systems, and reckless disregard for human life have failed to protect our most vulnerable citizens," the federal agency wrote, adding, "Under Secretary Kennedy's leadership, HHS is restoring integrity and transparency to organ procurement and transplant policy by putting patients' lives first." So Robert F. Kennedy Jr. is saying it loud. Hospitals are taking organs from patients who still show signs of life. All right, this isn't compassion, right? It's not compassion, it's exploitation. The healthcare industry profits by harvesting. And it's important that Christians are able to discern the difference between life-saving and life-taking. Micah 6:8 says, "Do justice, love mercy." Proverbs 31:8, "Speak up for those who cannot speak for themselves." Think about in the Bible, the story of the Good Samaritan. The priest and Levite ignored the half-dead man. Hospitals today don't pass by. They profit from the vulnerable. Now, all right, second final disclaimer. Let me say this again. I'm not condemning every person who wants to be an organ donor. Maybe you've thought about it as, a way to help others, like we should. But hear me, if reform doesn't actually happen, if we don't see real safeguards put in place, then being a donor today could mean putting your life in the hands of a system that doesn't value it. It may be wise to step back until there's proof the corruption has been cleaned out. And I briefly mentioned it before, but Matt Walsh mentioned in a recent article about how organ transplants are extremely lucrative procedures. I mean, a double lung transplant, for example, can cost $2 million. A liver transplant can cost $1 million. A kidney transplant, the bargain bin of the organ donation world, still costs hundreds of thousands of dollars. And he talked about it in the article. He said, so given all these numbers, it's reasonable to ask whether a hospital, when confronted with a seriously ill patient who happens to be an organ donor, might have an incentive to murder that patient, or at least let him die. It's certainly reasonable to ask what safeguards are in place to prevent something like this from happening. If the love of money is the root of, does it say some kinds of evil? No. The love of money is the root of all evil. So if this is about money and an extraordinary amount of money, is evil at play? Does anybody within these systems love money? I feel like I have to ask silly questions to make a point. And so all these things I'm saying, what's the New York Times? New York Times, what do they say? New York Times op-ed argues more Americans need to be declared dead for organ harvesting. And then the New York Times, they gave 2 thumbs up to the op-ed through additional articles. But yeah, here, go ahead and put that on the screen if you don't believe me. A New York Times opinion piece this week argued the definition of death. The definition of death must be broadened in order to harvest more healthy organs from comatose patients. Brain death is rare, though. In New York State, with a population of 20 million, there are on average fewer than 500 cases suitable for organ procurement and transplantation each year, the piece notes. The supply is not nearly enough to meet the demand. That leaves circulatory death donors. So the solution is we need to widen the definition of death. Unbelievable. This is chilling. Elites openly argue for redefining death so that we can harvest more organs. It's utilitarianism, right? Sacrificing one life, sacrificing a life to supposedly save another. It's also, Baal worship in modern clothing. A human sacrifice for the community's good. But yet Deuteronomy 30:19 says, choose life, that you and your children may live. Genesis 9:6, life is sacred because we are made in God's image. Even the story of Cain and Abel. Cain justifies his violence. He justifies his violence, but God still called it murder. Redefinitions don't fool God. And I want to read a longer article here because I thought it was really powerful. So this article is called I Removed Myself from the Organ Donor Registry. And this is an article written by Texas Right to Life, which is the oldest and the largest statewide pro-life organization in Texas. So the author writes this: as a 15-year-old waiting in my local DMV to apply for my learner's permit, I faced a question I was not prepared to answer, like we all did, right? Did I want to designate myself as an organ donor? Sitting in that waiting room, checking the box to become an organ donor seemed like the decent thing to do. I didn't want to be selfish or wasteful. After all, in the worst case scenario, I wouldn't be needing my organs anymore. All right. And that is the pitch, right? And I fully agree with it. If like the system was right, like donating your organs can be a wonderful, wonderful thing. But that's the pitch. It feels noble, it feels decent, and I get it. And I'm not here to condemn the very idea of organ donation. I believe in saving lives. But the question is, can you trust the system that handles those decisions right now? That's what we need to expose. The first concern, are they really dead? Let's go back to the article. A pro-life person's first concern seems simple at the outset: ensuring that the people whose organs are being donated are truly deceased. But how do we define death under the state law and hospital policy? This seems a humorously obvious question, but vulnerable patients in controversial cases aren't laughing. Because if life and death can be redefined by man, then the entire process is corrupt at its foundation. As a 15-year-old in the DMV, I assume the powers that be would surely have a clear, unquestionable system in place for determining death. But the truth is, most of us have failed to recognize the deadly implications of ambiguity in the law. The Uniform Determination of Death Act, written in 1981, says a person may be declared brain dead when there is irreversible cessation of all functions of the entire brain, including the brain stem. A person with zero brain function can't take a breath on their own. Their heart only beats a few days without a ventilator, and other organs shut down. That's the picture most of us imagine when we check the donor box. But here's the problem. Prominent cases show patients declared brain dead living for months or even recovering. And they list a couple of people. Clearly, the standard is not consistent. And under Texas law, hospitals are largely left to their own devices. The law says death is when, in the announced opinion of a physician according to ordinary standards, brain function has ceased. But what does that even mean? Different hospitals, and this is what's so important, and all over the reading, I've been seeing the same thing over and over again. Different hospitals can interpret it differently. Kind of going back to that first clip I played of Alex Jones. And those differing standards can mean life or death for anyone carrying that little red heart on their license. Because if the definition of death is in the opinion of a physician, that's not a safeguard. That's a loophole. And until those loopholes are closed, until there's consistency and integrity, maybe we need to pump the brakes before putting our trust in the system. And again, I'm not saying never be a donor. I'm saying don't blindly, hand your life over to a broken structure. The real danger of the registry. What Texas Right to Life's patient advocates have seen in practice is that if you are listed on the registry, healthcare professionals and attorneys will regard organ donation as your final decision rather than simply an option. This can translate into the terrifying situation of hospital staff moving forward with organ harvesting over your loved one's attempts to protect you from unethical practices. And that's the tragedy. Once you're on the registry, your yes becomes a weapon that can be used against your own family. And until reform is real, your yes might empower corruption more than compassion. Family pressure. Our patient advocacy team has taken call after heartbreaking call from Texas families struggling even to get a second opinion, as they face overwhelming pressure to consent to organ harvesting and removing treatment, often within 72 hours of some tragic incident. 3 days. 3 days, that's all it takes. And that's why I'm sounding the alarm, because while reform is talked about, it is not yet a reality. Until it is, your family may be pressured, manipulated, even, bulldozed into a decision that no Christian should ever have to make, at least not have to make in a hurry. My choice to take myself off the registry and remove that heart from my ID card does not mean that I no longer have the option to donate my organs. And this is really important here. This means that the choice will remain in my own hands and in the hands of my husband, with whom I have had discussions at length, who I have legally designated to make these life and death decisions when I cannot make them for myself. I think it's powerful. That's a great thing. If the system is broken, then give that medical power of attorney to someone that you trust in life. And it's just an approach I can respect. Not throwing out the idea of donation altogether, but making sure that the decision stays in the hands of people who value life, not your lucrative organs, not a hospital committee. And until reform comes, that may be the wisest way forward. We started out talking about on the program, just to kind of do a full circle. It was well over a decade ago that, Alex Jones was warning that this was coming, and they mocked him, called it a conspiracy. And now even the AP admits it's happening. Reuters. When a nation loses its fear of God, it loses its reverence for life. Hosea 4:6, my people are destroyed for lack of knowledge. And Romans 1, a depraved mind accepts what God calls evil. I'm out of time for today's show. This is more than medical ethics. I believe that it's spiritual warfare over life itself, from the things you talk about on the program, from abortion to euthanasia to now organ harvesting. We see the same demonic spirit, man playing God. I believe Christians must stand apart and declare boldly every life is sacred until the Lord calls it home. Deuteronomy 30, verse 19 says, choose life that you and your children may live. Guys, we had to land this plane quickly. I am over time. I will see you all next week.